Pepe the Frog. Pepe? Pepe. Pepe? Pepe. 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 Good God. God is dead. And so is Pepe. So, in 2017, actually, you know what? If we're gonna do this, I need a beer. So, in 2017, creator Matt Fury killed off his own cartoon, Pepe the Frog. So he was originally conceived in 2005 on a MySpace page called Boys Club, a series of cartoons illustrating Fury himself as Pepe and following the exploits of the Boys Club. So why the dramatic exit? He illustrates a single strip comic in which Pepe? I'm saying this too much. So why the dramatic funeral? Why the dramatic goodbye? Well, a few years ago, our unfortunate frog dude was appropriated into Chan culture, often becoming overtly violent, racist, and photoshopped to look like Hitler and any other number of tasteless things. Eventually, the Anti-Defamation League even listed him as a hate symbol, noting that often he was used in non-hateful contexts, but he had been deliberately appropriated as a hate symbol. What the fuck, right? To understand Pepe the Frog is something very complicated and weird that involves knowing way more about online right culture than I think your average person wants to know. So I'm going to try and keep this short, concise, clear. Sometime in the 2010s, it's hard to pin down exactly when, and that's kind of on purpose, the right began photoshopping this sad frogman to look like Ku Klux Klan members, Hitler, any other number of awful things. Eventually, these cartoons turned into something called esoteric Kekism, a mock religion that revolves around the worship of Pepe. To illustrate how nothing is by accident on the online right, I think it's worth exploring the term itself. So, what's Kek, anyway? My life is very weird. Kek originated as a variant of lel, L-E-L, which itself is a common typo of L-O-L, laugh out loud, as we all want to do every once in a while, you know? Kek was used in online communities and forums for one very online person to signal to another person that they were both indeed very online. Good for them. Eventually, this slang morphed into the entirety that is known as Kekistan, which is a fake country with a fake flag. I'll probably put it here. We'll see about post. That very deliberately looks like the Nazi flag. How fun. This fake country also has an entire fake history that was conceived of by grown adults with nothing better to do. They have written of struggles and battles and wars that they genuinely feel like are good metaphors to explain their perceived, very strong emphasis on perceived here, persecution under dun-dun-dun, political correctness. And so, we now know what Kekism is. What's with the esoteric bit? This is a much more obscure reference, arguably, and it's a historical reference, not an online one. This is a reference to a woman named Savitri Devi. Hitler fangirl, certified asshole, and overall just terrible person. So she's the founder of the notion of esoteric Hitlerism. Very brief rundown of that. During the rise of the Nazi Party, Hitler was not super into the notion of occultism, despite the fact that some of his followers were. Once he was dead, they were all sort of like, well, we can still do whatever we want, right? Because everything is flexible in our worldview, and whatever we say is true, so cool. Eventually, she founds the notion of esoteric Hitlerism, a school of thought that treats him as the god incarnate that brought the needed fascism and order to the world so that we can all, I don't know, flourish? That doesn't seem like the right word. Anyways, if you want a more in-depth description of her than I'm going to offer here and just want to know about her awful self, I strongly suggest the 2-part episode of Behind the Bastards by Robert Evans. It's very in-depth and pretty upsetting. I will put the link here or down there, probably down there, given we'll see what happens in post. The right likes to make its memes convoluted and layered. They're referential on purpose because for a normie to get it ruins the joke. The right is constantly burning up old slang in place of new ones because every time their words are accepted into the mainstream, they have to detach. They need to be able to posture this detachment so that all conversations that they have with someone who disagrees with them can culminate in the single, deeply disingenuous and incredibly predictable statement: it's just a joke. You know what? That's giving them too much credit. Much better. So in 2019, Mother Jones released an article by Stephanie Bensimer? I don't know, sorry. She explores the impact of memes, arguably the most prolific style of humor we have online these days, how it had an effect on the election in 2016, and how the power of memes eventually drove things like Turning Point USA to start hosting seminars called How to Own the Lib. I know. It's genuinely funny to me that they think that's like cool and triggering, because if I submitted a paper with a title that stupid, I would fail classes and be laughed out of academics. Anyway, my personal gripes with their semantics aside, the focus on memes on the right has been ramping up because as a group, they understand the power of disseminating information, or disinformation for that matter, quickly and with a laugh. During the run-up to the 2016 election, there was actually a Trump meme generator that supporters and trolls were encouraged to use to make image macros with text that showed support of Trump or disdain of Hillary Clinton. Eventually, there was actually a flash mob that encouraged the users of the Trump meme generator to meet IRL, as the kids are wont to say these days. I think. Maybe. There's also Jeff Gacy? I genuinely don't care. Never mind. A Koch brothers bro, generally insufferable venture capitalist and self-described memetics expert, but admittedly, he did make one pretty astute observation about the power of memes. It seems obvious that more aggressive communication tactics and broader warfare through trolling and memes is a necessary, inexpensive, and easy way to help destroy the appeal and morale of our common enemies. Memetic warfare is about taking control of the dialogue, narrative, and psychological space. It's about denigrating, disrupting, and subverting the enemy's effort to do the same. So, needless to say, the right has been effectively weaponizing memes to attract a broader, more mainstream audience to their base ideals, while simultaneously mocking the values held by the just left of center and leftists. This Mother Jones article notes that when we talk about memes in politics, they're cheap, subversive, and designed to promote an emotional reaction. Memes are a disruptive form of information guerrilla warfare. The article speculates that Republicans have gotten Gacy's, I genuinely still don't care. They've gotten his message, whereas Democrats have just rejected it. As a pretty goddamn online person, I don't know if I agree with that sentiment. We've seen a rise in leftist content with people like Hassan Piker, satire pages like Awards for Good Boys by journalist Shelby Lorman, and a general sort of disillusionment with the status quo. I mean, I think, and this is a lot of personal speculation here, that the reason that it's harder for left memes to make their way into the mainstream is because to be leftist, you are inherently critical of the mainstream. For the just right of center and the extreme right, you're talking about things that want to maintain the status quo in varying degrees. The center and just right of center want to conserve. They want things to stay the same. They don't want to question the ingrained white supremacy of our societies. As you go to the more extreme right, they simply want to see those ingrained things become more explicit. To be just left of center, on the other hand, means that you are inherently questioning the status quo and mainstream expectations. You are saying that we need to reassess everything so that everyone can have a taste of dignity. Your average person doesn't want to have to think about the things they've contributed to a culture because they don't mean to be bad people. So that means that it's easier for them to support things that just want to maintain, that want to keep things as they are. So really, a lot of these political memes have just become a way for people to say the quiet part loud in what is apparently a both funny and socially acceptable way. So back to Pepe. Why a cartoon frog, dude? You know? So let's be very clear. The choice of memes and cartoons is quite intentional. Being able to point at the absurdity of a cartoon frog from MySpace being called a hate symbol by the Anti-Defamation League is the exact point. Being able to scoff at the idea of memes perpetuating hate speech and violence is the exact point. Being able to mock normies for not getting that it's a joke is the exact point. In the phenomenal paper done by Data and Society, Media Manipulation and Online Disinformation by Alice Marwick and Rebecca Lewis, the notion of for the lulz is taken very seriously, much to the chagrin of people who use that as an excuse for whatever kind of behavior makes them feel like a big boy. In their definition, lulz, a deliberate corruption of LOL, is a motivating force for some manipulators. The term refers to taking enjoyment at the expense of a victim, a kind of directed schadenfreude. It has been used for years by trolls who explain their often disruptive actions by simply stating, "I did it for the lulz." Those driven to manipulate the media for the lulz may simply enjoy spreading chaos. Because trolls have long had a complicated relationship with the media, they also specifically relish targeting news outlets as their victims. In some cases, the intent of lulz versus ideology may be deliberately unclear. Internet users often post racist or sexist content, but claim to do so merely as a way to generate lulz through the offense of others. So here's the thing about unoriginal, repetitive, edgelord humor. It works at red pilling because users in those spaces who see people using racial slurs and any other number of things become so accustomed to it that they start using it themselves. And eventually, once you've been using it ironically, a troll is much more likely to become susceptible to actual ideas of white nationalism and white supremacy. So when someone tells you it's just a joke, there's no functional difference between that and them saying it seriously. They know it's not funny. They know it's at your or another minority's expense. And they do that on purpose because they are desperately in need of feeling better than someone. As Marwick and Lewis point out, many alt-right actions on forums like 4chan, Reddit, any other number of places, propagating Nazi symbols, using racial epithets, and spreading anti-immigrant ideology, all of these things support white nationalist ideologies. And so whether it's undertaken sincerely or ironically, the outcome of that support is the same. It doesn't matter. The joke defense is something devised to make people like me seem like we're being unreasonable and overly emotional, as I'm wont to do. But You know what? I'm actually going to go to some real comedians to explain why this is just ridiculous.
I think it's more we self-center.
Yeah.
There's certain things you know that you could have gotten away with saying in '09 that you should not even formally as a sentence in your head.
Don't even put it in your drafts.
Okay?
You know what I'm saying? Don't even try it.
If you watch the progression of our comedy, there's certain jokes we used to do that we won't do anymore. Because as we've experienced the world and we've come across different people, we realize that the humor hits differently, that a certain joke that might have been funny 4 years ago, like you actually meet a person from this specific group and you're like, oh shit, like I didn't even know that was offensive.
Oh.
Like, yes, we were from the Bronx. It's like, suck my dick and all that shit. But we're not in the crosshairs of PC culture like that because we're not, like, fighting against it. Like,
we're not out there like, oh, PC culture.
Yeah, you can't say what you want anymore.
You can't say what you want anymore. Nah, you can say what you want. You just got to be funny about it and, like, smart about it and approach it the right way.
And don't just say something for shock value. Because that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people are just like, oh, you're offended? Oh, I triggered you.
Sorry,
like,
triggered you, libtard. You're like, nah.
And, you know, like we say, there are people who are selling out arenas doing that. But it's just like, at the end of the day, what's the expectancy on that? How long can you do that for?
So what's the cost of all of this tiresome, redundant hate speech? It's not new, it's not interesting, but it's still a problem. Some parents have written some pretty upsetting op-eds detailing how they lost their children, often young sons, to the ideologies of the extreme right. They write of bright, sensitive young men falling into political forums and never really climbing back out. They become angry and reactive and full of conspiracy theories. Some of these people never speak to their kids again. One of the most telling stories is from an anonymous mother in the Washingtonian. She speaks of her son falling into the alt-right after a misunderstanding at school forces him to change schools. He was in a vulnerable place, and Reddit took precedence over any real in-person relationships. He spent less time with his family, he didn't really make friends, and spent more and more time online. Eventually, it became hard for her and her husband to even have a normal conversation with their son. Everything was a conspiracy or something out to get him. If users don't follow the rules, they get humiliated publicly. My husband and I started hearing a lot about normies, normie culture, and how normies were ruining the internet and destroying what they, meme insiders, worked so hard to achieve. Sam and his fellow Redditors used language that was often violently hostile. Not only did normies have no right to dare participate in meme world, they had no right to live. Literally. Thankfully, for these two parents, their son Sam eventually came back to them. After going to the Mother of All rallies in Washington, D.C. and seeing that the star players of Reddit and 4chan reconstituted in human form on the mall weren't nearly as convincing or witty or transgressive as they postured online, he became pretty disillusioned. Sam distanced himself from the communities, forging real-life friendships, and eventually asking his mother if she hated him when he was in the cult. But it gets worse. That was the list of victims from the 2019 Christchurch shooting. It was live streamed and greatly encouraged by people on 8chan. It's very easy to pretend that this stuff isn't serious because online life isn't real life. But the people are real, and the lives are real. I know it's a lot, and I know it's really heavy, but I think if we all just understand it a little bit more, we'll be able to have a little more compassion.
Motherfuckers took our whole flow, Sean. Our whole flow, Sean. Motherfuckers talking about academic. Academic? Academic? What? Man, get the fuck out of here, man.
Oh shit.
Motherfuckers took our whole flow, man.